My name is Daniel, and for most of my life, I saw loyalty as something straightforward. I believe that when you care about someone, you stay committed, and when you make a promise, you follow through. I never thought relationships needed complicated rules or mind games to work. To me, honesty was the foundation, and once two people decided to build a life together, everything else came down to everyday effort and mutual respect. I met Laura when I was 30. It happened at a friend's birthday party, one of those casual evenings where people stand in small groups and talk about work, travel, and plans they might never follow. She was not trying to be the center of attention, but she had a calm confidence that made people listen when she spoke. When we started talking, the conversation felt natural, without pressure or performance. She told me she wanted stability in her life, someone reliable and grounded. I told her I wanted the same. We laughed about how boring that sounded, but deep down, we both knew it wasn't boring at all. It was rare. Our relationship grew slowly. We didn't rush into big promises. We learned each other's habits, strengths, and weak points. I discovered she liked quiet mornings and strong coffee. She learned that I needed space when I was stressed, and that I didn't enjoy loud arguments. We respected those differences instead of trying to change them. After 2 years, we moved in together. Living together didn't reveal anything dramatic. It made things more comfortable. We shared responsibilities, divided bills, built routines. We had small disagreements, but we solved them by talking. I felt proud of that. I thought we were doing it right. When I proposed, it wasn't a grand public moment. It was in our apartment after dinner. I told her I wanted to build something long-term, something steady. She cried before she answered, and those tears felt like proof that she valued what we had. When she said yes, I felt certain I was making the right decision. The first years of marriage were stable and calm. We worked hard, saved money, and talked about having children one day. There was no drama, no big crisis. I trusted her completely, and I believe she trusted me the same way. Things began to change when Laura accepted a new job. At first, I was proud of her. The position came with better pay and more responsibility. It also came with travel and long hours. I adjusted without complaining because I believed supporting her was part of being a good husband. I cooked more often. I handled more things at home. I told myself this was temporary, that pressure at work would settle. But slowly, small details started to feel different. She kept her phone closer than before. She smiled at messages and turned the screen away. She answered questions about her trips in short sentences. When I tried to start deeper conversations, she seemed distracted, like part of her attention was somewhere else. I told myself not to overthink it. People get busy. Stress changes behavior. I didn't want to become suspicious without reason. Then one evening, she returned from a conference in Miami. She looked tired but strangely energized, as if something had filled her with a new kind of energy. We had dinner together, and everything seemed normal on the surface. Later, she went to shower and left her laptop open on the kitchen table. I wasn't searching for evidence. I was sitting there when an email notification appeared. The tone felt wrong, too personal, too warm for a professional message. I tried to ignore it, but something in my chest tightened. I read more than I should have. The messages were clear enough, not dramatic, not explicit, just intimate in a way that didn't belong in a marriage. The man's name was Marcus. When she came back into the room, I asked her directly if there was something she needed to tell me. At first, she denied everything. She said Marcus was just a colleague and that I was misunderstanding things. When I told her I had seen the emails, her expression changed. She sat down and covered her face, and the silence between us felt heavier than any argument. She admitted it had been going on for 4 months. 4 months of messages, meetings, and secrets. I remember feeling calm in a strange way. Not peaceful, but focused. It was like my mind switched into survival mode. I asked her simple questions and listened to her answers carefully. She said it wasn't serious. She said she felt lonely during travel. She said it was a mistake that grew too far. I asked if she had slept with him. She hesitated before saying yes. That hesitation hurt more than the word itself. In that moment, I understood that trust does not disappear in 1 second. It dissolves. It becomes impossible to hold once you see what's underneath. She cried and promised to end it. She offered therapy and transparency. She said she loved me and didn't want to lose our marriage. Part of me wanted to believe her because I loved the life we had built. Another part of me knew that something essential had already broken, and no promise could return it to its original form. That night, I left the apartment and stayed with my brother. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply needed distance from the space that suddenly felt dishonest. As I lay awake in his guest room, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept repeating in my head. She wasn't afraid of hurting me until she was afraid of losing me. That realization changed everything. The next morning, I woke up in my brother's apartment feeling older than I had the night before. It wasn't because I hadn't slept much, even though I hadn't. It was because something inside me had shifted from confusion to clarity. When you discover that the person you trusted most has been living a second life, you stop asking how it happened and start asking what you are willing to accept next. Laura called me before I even got out of bed. Her voice was softer than usual, almost fragile. She said she hadn't slept either. She said she was terrified of losing me. She said she had already ended things with Marcus and that she would prove it however I needed. I listened quietly and told her I needed time to think, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to be steady in my decision. I didn't want anger to decide for me. I wanted something calmer and more permanent to guide me. That afternoon, I went back to the apartment while she was at work. I walked through each room slowly, noticing how normal everything looked. The couch was still in the same place. Our wedding photo was still on the shelf. Her jacket was hanging by the door. Nothing had moved, and yet everything felt different. I packed a small bag with essentials and left again. Over the next few days, we met twice to talk. Each time, she came prepared with promises. She said she would quit her job if necessary. She said she would give me passwords, locations, full access to everything. She said she would go to therapy and expected me to join her. She said that marriage means fighting through hard seasons and that what happened didn't have to define us. I noticed how carefully she avoided certain words. She never called it a betrayal without adding something to soften it. She never described it as a choice without also calling it a mistake. The language mattered to me because words show how someone sees their own actions. At one point, she said she had felt disconnected from me and didn't know how to say it. That was the first time I felt something close to anger rise in my chest. I told her that feeling disconnected does not justify building a secret relationship. If she had felt distant, we could have talked. Instead, she had chosen secrecy. She cried again, and for a moment I almost stepped forward to comfort her out of habit. Then I stopped myself. I realized that my instinct to calm her was part of the problem. I had always tried to protect her feelings, even when she was the one who caused harm. When I told her I wanted a divorce, the tone of the conversation changed. She became defensive. She said I was reacting too fast. She said people survive worse things. She said I was giving up instead of fighting. She even asked if there was someone else in my life, as if that would explain my decision better than her actions. I told her calmly that there was no one else, and that this was not about replacing her. It was about understanding that trust, once broken this deeply, changes everything. The divorce process started quietly but quickly. We hired lawyers. We discussed finances. We divided property. We did not have children, which simplified the legal side, but emotionally, it still felt like cutting through something that had once been whole. Laura wanted the separation to look mutual. She suggested telling friends that we had grown apart because of work stress. She said there was no need to make private mistakes public. I understood why she wanted that version. It protected her reputation. It allowed her to move forward without carrying visible consequences. I refused. I did not post anything online. I did not start arguments in group chats. But when close friends asked why we were divorcing, I told the truth in simple terms. She had been unfaithful for months. I was not interested in rewriting the story to make it more comfortable. Some people reacted with shock. Others tried to minimize it, saying things like, "Everyone makes mistakes," or "At least you found out." I learned quickly that people prefer softer explanations because they don't like seeing something stable collapse. It makes them question their own security. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. Not long after that, Laura moved in with Marcus. Hearing that confirmed what I had already accepted. This had not been a temporary lapse in judgment. It had been a new direction she had chosen while still married to me. For a while, I focused on stabilizing my own life. I stayed with my brother for a few weeks, then found a smaller apartment closer to my office. I sold the old couch because I couldn't stand looking at it. I bought new dishes, not because I needed them, but because I wanted something that didn't carry memory. I worked out more. I spent weekends with my parents. I kept busy, not to avoid emotion, but to prevent myself from replaying the same questions again and again. At the same time, I watched from a distance. Laura's career continued to grow. She was promoted within a year of our divorce. Marcus remained at the same company, and they appeared together at corporate events. Her social media showed a confident, driven professional woman who had navigated change and embraced new chapters. She posted quotes about resilience and integrity. Integrity. The word stood out to me more than it should have. I didn't feel jealous of her success. I felt unsettled by the gap between her public image and private behavior. I began noticing more details through mutual contacts. A former coworker mentioned that Laura had a habit of getting very close to people she worked with, especially when projects required travel. Another person hinted that her relationship with Marcus had likely started before the timeline she admitted to me. None of this was dramatic on its own, but patterns rarely are. They reveal themselves slowly. One evening, Nina's husband, who worked in the same industry, mentioned something in passing. He said there had been quiet discussions at Laura's company about blurred boundaries between team leaders and staff. No official complaint, just discomfort. That was the first time I understood that what happened to me might not have been an isolated event. It might have been part of how she operated when ambition and opportunity mixed together. I didn't act immediately. Revenge built on emotion is easy to dismiss. Revenge built on facts is harder to ignore. So I started observing carefully. I saved screenshots of public posts where she spoke about trust and leadership. I kept records of timelines that didn't match her original explanation. I wrote down dates and details I could verify. I avoided exaggeration because exaggeration destroys credibility. At first, I told myself I was doing this for closure. I wanted to feel certain about what had happened, to make sure I wasn't imagining patterns that didn't exist. Over time, it became something else. It became preparation. Laura's greatest strength was her image. She was composed, intelligent, and confident. She knew how to speak in meetings and how to make people believe in her vision. That image protected her. If I wanted consequences that felt real, I understood that attacking her personally would achieve nothing. It would only make me look bitter. But exposing patterns of professional misconduct, if they existed, would be different. Companies respond to risk, not heartbreak. I wasn't interested in humiliating her. I was interested in balance. And balance requires timing. As months passed, I felt less like a victim and more like someone who had survived something important. I started dating again, slowly. I met a woman named Claire through friends. She was calm, straightforward, and honest in ways that felt unfamiliar after my marriage. Being around her reminded me that not everyone hides things behind charm. Even as my own life stabilized, I didn't forget what I had learned. Trust is powerful. Reputation is fragile. And truth, when placed carefully, can move quietly but deeply. I didn't know exactly how things would unfold yet, but I knew one thing clearly. If Laura's success was built on behavior that harmed others, then the truth deserved to exist where it could not be ignored. And I was patient enough to wait. Time moved forward in a way that felt calm on the surface, even though something important was slowly building underneath. My daily life became stable again. I focused on work, spent time with family, and allowed myself to trust new experiences without constantly comparing them to the past. I did not wake up angry anymore, and I did not go to sleep thinking about Laura every night. The pain had changed shape. It was no longer sharp. It had become something clearer. The file I had created on my laptop stayed there, untouched most days. I did not obsess over it or read through it repeatedly. I added information only when something relevant appeared, and I made sure that everything inside it was factual and verifiable. I avoided assumptions and refused to exaggerate anything, because I understood that credibility depends on restraint. As the months passed, I began to see the situation more objectively. Laura had always been ambitious, and ambition itself is not a problem. What concerned me was the way she used personal connections when ambition became more important than loyalty or professional boundaries. The more I learned from people who had worked with her, the clearer the pattern became. She formed close relationships quickly, built emotional trust, and sometimes blurred the line between professional mentorship and personal involvement. Nothing she did could be easily described as criminal, but it created confusion and discomfort for those involved. One conversation changed everything. A former colleague of hers reached out to me privately and asked if we could meet. She explained that she had struggled for months with feelings she could not fully explain. Laura had supported her at first and given her important responsibilities, but over time their communication had become more personal. There were private dinners connected to work travel and conversations that felt too familiar for a professional setting. The colleague never felt openly pressured, yet she also felt that saying no would affect her career. Eventually, she requested to move to another team because the situation no longer felt healthy. Listening to her, I realized that what had happened in my marriage might not have been an isolated event. The issue was not simply infidelity, it was a pattern of behavior connected to power and influence. That understanding changed my motivation completely. I was no longer acting from heartbreak. I was acting from a belief that repeated patterns, especially in leadership roles, should not remain invisible. When I decided to move forward, I prepared everything carefully. The report I drafted was structured and professional, not emotional. I included timelines, public statements that contradicted internal behavior, and written accounts from former employees who were willing to speak confidentially. I avoided dramatic language and focused on risk, because organizations respond to potential liability more than personal stories. I submitted the report to the company's ethics department and legal office without informing Laura. I did not threaten publicity, and I did not demand immediate action. My goal was not humiliation, it was accountability. The investigation unfolded slowly, as corporate processes usually do. There were interviews, document reviews, and internal evaluations that were not visible to the public. From the outside, nothing appeared to change at first. Laura continued posting online about leadership and professional growth, although her activity gradually became less frequent. I heard from mutual contacts that certain projects had been reassigned and that internal conversations about boundaries were taking place. Eventually, she called me. Her voice sounded controlled, but I could sense tension beneath it. She asked directly whether I had filed a complaint. I told her that I had provided factual information when asked, and that I believed it was important for the company to understand the full context of events. She accused me of trying to damage her career because of our failed marriage, and she suggested that I had not truly moved on. I explained calmly that my actions were not about revenge for our divorce. They were about patterns that extended beyond our relationship. I told her that if her leadership had always respected professional boundaries, then the review would confirm that. The silence that followed was heavier than anger would have been. Weeks later, the company announced that she would be stepping down from her position. The public statement was short and neutral, thanking her for her contributions and wishing her success in future opportunities. There was no mention of misconduct, which is typical in corporate exits. Shortly afterward, Marcus also left the company. From an external perspective, it looked like ordinary career movement. Internally, it was clear that consequences had been applied. When the announcement became official, I did not feel excitement or victory. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of completion. The imbalance that had existed between her public image and private behavior had finally narrowed. Nothing dramatic had happened, but the system had adjusted. A few days later, Laura sent me an email. It was longer and more reflective than I expected. She admitted that ambition and validation had influenced her decisions in ways she had not recognized at the time. She acknowledged that her choices affected not only our marriage, but also the professional environment around her. She did not ask for forgiveness. She wrote that she hoped we could both find peace moving forward. I read the message carefully and took time before responding. When I finally wrote back, I chose neutral honesty. I told her I appreciated her willingness to acknowledge the broader impact of her actions, and that I genuinely hoped she would build healthier boundaries in the future. I did not reopen old wounds, and I did not attempt to reconnect emotionally. After that exchange, I deleted the file from my laptop. I did not delete it because I regretted what I had done. I deleted it because its purpose had been fulfilled. Keeping it longer would have meant holding on to something that no longer defined my life. Claire and I continued building something steady and transparent. Being with her reminded me that trust does not require constant monitoring when both people value it equally. My experience had not made me cynical. It had made me more selective and more aware of what healthy commitment truly requires. Looking back now, I understand that what I did was not about destruction. It was about alignment between actions and consequences. Laura's charm and success had protected her for a long time. But protection built on image alone cannot last forever. Eventually, patterns become visible. The most important change, however, happened inside me. I stopped feeling like a victim of someone else's choices. I became someone who had faced betrayal, processed it, and responded in a way that reflected my own values. If you found yourself in a similar situation, would you choose to walk away and let time handle everything? Or would you believe that sometimes truth needs a steady hand to bring it into the light?